everyone, I'm Ixalan, and it's that time again, time for me to look back at a set that I did a full set limited review on, in this case Rivals of Ixalan, and talk about what I got wrong and why. Before we know it, this format will be pretty much over. Masters 25 spoiler season starts next week, comes out a couple weeks later, and we'll be drafting that for a while. Then we'll be turning our attention towards Cube for a little bit until the next set, Dominaria, comes out. So while we are still playing this format some, I wanted to talk about the cards I screwed up on. It is basically impossible to be right about all the cards in a set before you have a chance to play with them, and that's when I do the set reviews, and usually I'm significantly wrong about 10% of the cards in a set. Significantly here means that I was wrong by more than half a letter grade. In all, there are 12 cards that I got wrong in Rivals of Ixalan, and there are actually 196 cards in the set, so I did a little bit better than my average, only missing like 6 or 7% of the cards in the set. However, I missed on some pretty badly, and as we will see, in terms of big misses, this may be one of my worst sets ever. Let's get started by looking at the white cards I got wrong, of which there are 3. First up is Blazing Hope, which I was clearly overly hopeful about when I gave it a C-. Many people commented that I was being overly generous to this card and giving it a C-, and in the end, you were all correct. A C- means that a card isn't great or anything, but will make the cut in your deck sometimes. But it turns out this is just an unplayable card, which means it's an F. I thought maybe that vampire decks might be able to have some control over their life between the ability to pay it and gain it, and could maybe play this in a deck that really got there in those types of effects. But it is just never consistent enough for that to be the case. There just aren't enough vampires that let you pay life. There are a few of them, but if there were more, this might have seen a little bit more play. Sorry for any of you who ran this card thinking I was right about it, though there don't seem to be a lot of you who were, based on the comments. I'm sure if you did run it, you quickly realized that I was just wrong. The next white card I misjudged is Majestic Obdurate. I gave it a D- in decks that weren't heavy in dinosaurs and gave it a build around B, thinking it would be a pretty nice dinosaur payoff for red-white or green-white decks, as throwing your 4/4 into the sky with the Obdurate sounds pretty nice. And it is, but the card has some serious issues. A B means the card can really have a major impact on the game a significant portion of the time, and that if you see the card, it is a great sign that a certain deck is open, but that's turned out not to be the case with the Obdurate, which is more of a C in a dinosaur deck. I thought a 4-mana 2/2 flyer would play alright in this format, but the large amount of efficient removal that can take this guy down really hurts. Getting this mutinied or moment of craving is really rough, as you just spent 4 mana and likely your whole turn doing this, and your opponent paid 1 or 2 mana to kill it and probably then played something else to develop their board, and that's pretty brutal. There are also tons of common and uncommon flyers around that are just bigger than the Obdurate, some of which cost less mana. In the end, the Obdurate is definitely playable in a dinosaur deck, but it isn't the game changer I thought it would be due to its mediocre stats. Now let's move to the last white card on the list, which is a card that I underrated instead of overrating like the first 2 cards we've talked about. And that card is Snubhorn Sentry, which I gave a straight F to. I reasoned that the format was going to be too aggressive and had too many early drops that were evasive for you to ever want to play a 1-mana 0/3 who became a 3/3 later. And, well, I was wrong. Sure, you do end up in some situations where the Sentry really can't block and it feels pretty terrible, but it turns out a 0/3 can still block a significant percentage of the early creatures in this format, and eventually turning into a 3/3, which happens more quickly than I expected, makes it into a real threat. I'm not saying Snubhorn Sentry is great or anything, but it's a solid playable in any white deck, and especially the more defensive decks in the format that are looking to win in the late game. A kind of deck that I wasn't sure was going to be able to exist in this format, but they really do. He's a solid C, and that's a pretty huge upgrade from the F I gave him. Sorry for doubting you, Snubhorn. At least I was more or less correct about the other white common that many were undervaluing in the early going, Sun-Crested Pterodon. That does it for white. The color I got the most wrong in. As in every other color, we're going to talk about 2 or fewer cards. Let's move to blue now. First up is Curious Obsession. I gave this a C-, which was really far off, and to be honest, that is a grade that it is pretty hard for me to rationalize, even how I was thinking at the time. I mean, I gave Snubhorn Sentry a bad grade because I was concerned about evasive early drops, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together and realize that those early evasive creatures are insane with Curious Obsession. I don't know what I was thinking. 1 mana for a +1/+1 stat boost and a curiosity effect is actually incredibly good, and it has won me, and many of you, many games. I often underrate auras because I'm concerned about the potential 2-for-1 that they open up for your opponent, But if you play Obsession correctly, that's not going to happen. As long as you draw one card off of this, you're at least breaking even, and after that, things start getting insane. This card went from being what I thought was sort of a meh aura, a C-, to being one of Blue's best commons or uncommons. I think it's just a straight B now, and first pickable a significant percentage of the time. Next up, we have Cloaked Herald. I'm not normally a fan of 1-mana 1/1 unblockable creatures, and historically they haven't been very good and limited. I gave this a D when I would normally have given it an F because it's a merfolk and obviously that creature type matters. I gave the other early evasive creatures grades that I would stand by today more or less, but not the Herald. Between helping decks trigger raid and having the useful creature type and holding auras like Curious Obsession particularly effectively, Cloaked Herald is a perfectly playable card in any blue deck. It is a little bit better still in a merfolk deck that can find ways to put counters on it, but it's fine in any deck, which means it's just a C. I'm not saying you should be first picking this, just that it should make the cut in most of your blue decks. Now let's move to black. First up is Golden Demise. When I discussed this card in my review, I noted that this card existing in this format, along with all of the other efficient removal at common and uncommon in Rivals of Ixalan, could enable the format to be slower and enable control strategies in this format, and I was sort of right. But what I didn't get right is how easy it is to ascend with this card, and to ascend in general. I didn't want to give it too high of a grade, since I didn't think aggressive decks would want it in most cases. But it turns out it's pretty good in any deck, and while certainly better in a defensive control deck, it turns out that aggressive decks in black can make use of this pretty well too. If you're aggressive, you're probably curving out, and if you're curving out, you're probably ascending. Casting this before combat, blowing up a significant portion of your opponent's board, and attacking with your guys into their weakened creatures is just savage. This isn't quite as good as Ravenous Chupacabra, but it's really the only uncommon in the set that even comes close. It's definitely first pickable, and I should have given it a B+ instead of a C+. Next up is Pitiless Plunderer, which I also gave a C+ to. Let's take a moment to discuss how ridiculous it is that I gave Golden Demise and Pitiless Plunderer the same grade. I was wrong about both, but in the opposite direction for the Plunderer. The Plunderer is basically a worse Sailor of Means. It has the same stats and makes the treasure less frequently while costing 1 more mana. I thought that if you were splashing, you could consider running him, and you should still consider running Pitiless Plunderer if you are splashing and you don't have a lot of other fixing, but he is just too inconsistent a source of treasure, and his stats really aren't that special for the cost. In the end, I think the Plunderer has moved down to a D for me. You'll play him if you're desperate, but that's about it. So yeah, I missed pretty hard on 2 different black cards, but that's it for black. Now let's look at 2 red cards I want to revisit. The first of these was Forerunner of the Empire. I was right about all the other Forerunners, I think, giving them all a B- or so in the right deck, but I confidently declared in my set review that this Forerunner was the worst of the bunch. I, of course, realized he worked with Enrage, but I didn't think that would be enough for him to be great. I gave him a C+ in a Dino deck. However, it turns out that this format is absolutely loaded with X1s, and that Forerunner can deal with them quite easily, in addition to helping enable your Enrage. Additionally, the ability to search up a dinosaur seems to be a little stronger than the other tutor effects, since many dino decks have big fatties that can be a real problem for some decks to deal with, including the elder dinosaurs. All in all, I think this Forerunner is first pickable. Even if you only end up with 4 to 5 dinosaurs, he is worth running. Yes, his stats are mediocre, but his trigger is insane, and almost always is going to give you value. Overall, I'd give him a B. You should first pick him a lot of the time when you see him. Next up, we have Needletooth Raptor. This one is interesting because I think in my actual discussion of the card I did a good job. I thought it was good, and I noted that it would be a real pain to attack through and could really be abused by ping effects like the Forerunner we just looked at. The one thing I didn't like was the idea of paying 4 mana for a 2/2, and yeah, Moment of Craving makes this look ugly, but most other removal can't do more than trade evenly or close to evenly with it, and some of it is downright bad against it. Casting Bombard on this feels awful. I gave it a C+ before, but it turns out it's a first pickable card. It completely warps the game around it, and you'll play it in basically any red deck, which is enough for a B. Now let's go to green, where I only missed on 1 card. That card is Enter the Unknown, which I overrated. I really love the Explore mechanic. If you know me, I like all of these sorts of, like scry mechanics that draw you cards. I like treasures. I like all these sort of grindy mechanics that help you win the game in the long run if you do it over and over. That's the kind of magic I love the most. So I wanted this to be good, or at least playable. I thought the additional land that it lets you play would be nice, and that frequently this would be a lot like the original card, Explore, which it's sort of referencing. And yeah, that's what it is sometimes, but even then it isn't incredible. Having to have a creature in play for it makes it basically cost more mana than it actually does. I tried playing it early in the format and it was just bad. These days it is usually one of the last cards in the pack and that's where it should be. I gave it this C originally, but it's just an F. It's unplayable. Now that leaves us with multicolor cards where there are two cards that I woefully underrated. Both of the gold cards that I missed on are part of the legendary enchantment cycle of double-face cards, and the first is Adonis Clime. I don't really know what I was thinking when it came to this one. I gave it a C+. In rereading my notes on the card, I was concerned that opponents could find a way to keep you from amassing enough +1/+1 counters, and that they could just kill things that you use the ability on. And that's true, and it hurts when people do that. But that downside is not enough to keep this card as a C+. That's way too low. This card is actually a straight-up bomb and single-handedly wins games. Just the front half of the card prevents something of a problem, and both halves are made more powerful by the presence of hexproof Merfolk tokens and Jade Guardian, where you don't really have to worry about the downside of losing your creature that you're putting the counters on. The card goes all the way from a C+ to an A now, and is a gold card you first pick and try to splash in basically every situation. The final card we're going to talk about, and the other card in that same cycle, is Profane Precession. I knew what this card did was insanely powerful, but coming off of a format like Triple Ixalan, I thought it would be too clunky to be considered a bomb. I mean, you have to pay a total of 8 mana to take out your first creature, and that just seemed like too much. But it turns out this format slowed down considerably, and a card like Profane Precession has plenty of time to kill creatures, and then just give them all back to you in the long run. Like the Climb, it went all the way from a C+ to a straight up A. You should first pick it in 99% of packs and try to splash it. Well, those are the cards I screwed up on this time around. This format has turned out to be a pretty great one and less like Triple Ixalan than I expected, and for that I am grateful. It's a slow format where you can do a lot more than was possible in Triple Ixalan. As usual, I don't do a full set review for Masters sets, so I won't be doing one of those for Masters 25, which means I won't be doing one of these for Masters 25. The format will be around for too short of a time for this to be useful anyway. Though you can expect videos on that limited format, including draft videos, they won't be quite as in-depth as for a normal set, though I will be covering the best commons and uncommons in each color, the biggest bombs, and the draft archetypes. So the next time I do one of these videos will be for Dominaria, which I will of course be doing a full set review for. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button. If you want to make sure you catch more of my MTG content, most of which focuses on limited, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to help me continue to improve my channel, don't forget you can contribute on Patreon. You can find a link in the description below. Thanks for watching.